Now, I've always enjoyed Bad Batch as a show, but episode 3 did a lot of special things for me. The vibe, the pacing, the tone, it was so much more serious and darker than what I'm used to with the Bad Batch. I guess that's what happens when you only follow Commander Cody and Crosshair around for the episode. There's no Wrecker or Omega to lighten the mood. If you guys haven't started watching the new season of The Bad Batch, I highly recommend you check it out. So one of the big appeals for me with the Bad Batch series is that it goes into what happens in the days, weeks, months, and years after the Galactic Republic collapsed and the Galactic Empire rose in its place, with emphasis on what happened to the clones. Now, in this episode, we get to see another side of the post-Clone War era, and that is the Separatist side. We've always known that there were Separatist holdouts that the Empire had to fight against, remote outposts where the droidicas and tactical droids weren't remotely shut down and were still operational. In the first season of The Bad Batch, we actually visit Raxus Segundus, former capital world of the Confederacy. We witness the refusal of Senator Avi Singh to cooperate with the Imperial occupation forces. We also get to see Saw Gerrera and his partisans preparing to leave Onderon after refusing to fight for the new Empire as well. There's also that random group of Seppi droids on Agamar that Ezra Bridger and Captain Rex ran into. They had actually held out all the way until the beginning of the Galactic Civil War. It's actually really impressive that they made it that long. But what we haven't really seen yet is any fully functional Separatist holdouts until we arrive to the world of Desix, governed by former Separatist Senator Tawni Ames. She didn't really believe in peace anymore after her experiences during the Clone Wars. She basically decided to continue fighting.
There was a time I believed in that. So much so my colleague Mina Monteri and I put forth a treaty with Separatists and Republic senators alike. Your Supreme Chancellor rejected it. Peace was never an option.
Mina Monteri would be killed by Dooku's agents, who most likely were some type of porpoise dolphin humanoid hybrid. And of course, Tawni Ames would choose war. She didn't really trust the Republic, and she definitely didn't trust the Empire that followed it. I mean, there's something really remarkable and brave about the stand she takes in this episode, but it's so futile. The odds are truly overwhelming for her and her people. I mean, what is one world against an entire galaxy full of Star Destroyers? I guess that's also why this episode had a more dark and serious tone. There is no hope for the Separatists in this situation, and I think they understand that. But that doesn't mean they won't go down without a fight or make themselves so prickly that the Empire might just ignore them and go on to a softer target. Desix was lucky enough to still have a functional droid army stationed on it. I'm guessing either the droids were not shut down because of interference issues in the local system, or perhaps the droids were reactivated by techs once it became apparent that they would be needed once again.
Intel is limited, but here's what we know. Separatist insurgents, armed with a battalion of battle droids, have seized the city and taken Governor Grutton hostage.
A battalion is a pretty self-contained fighting force within the Separatist droid army. It's basically capable of carrying out its own independent operations without too much support. A droid battalion usually had around a few thousand droids split up into several different companies. They usually had some support weapons, vehicles, and potentially even air support. If we take a look at the Separatist droid army fielded by the Defenders here, it's actually a very diverse army. You had the standard B-1 battle droids, who basically stand in for your normal PFIs and can be equipped for a wide variety of combat and support roles. We see them being used as basic riflemen, anti-tank and anti-air gunners, and also as NCOs and tank commanders. Then we have the droidicas with their personal shields and deadly blasters, and of course the commando droids, who are extremely agile and deadly in close quarter combat. All of these droids are under the command of a tactical droid. Now, on paper, this is definitely a pretty formidable fighting force. It's definitely a lot more formidable than the force that was rotting away and rusting away on Agamar. But as we all witnessed throughout the Clone Wars, the Separatist droid army had to usually significantly outnumber the clone counterparts in order to secure victory. That, or the Seppi commander in charge, needed to be exceptionally cunning in how they deployed their rather limited troops. When Crosshair and Commander Cody arrived on the planet, their shuttle is quickly taken out by the Separatist air defenses, but once the clones have boots on the ground, they manage to slowly work their way into the city of Desix, past the defenses, and they manage to take out Governor Tawni Ames in relatively short order in a series of harrowing and well-choreographed CQC firefights. No, seriously, they did a great job. I know animated Star Wars shows don't do a good job with action sequences usually, but they really nailed it here. Anyway, this entire endeavor of challenging the Empire seems really foolish in hindsight. But it should be said that Commander Cody and Crosshair teaming up together is kind of an overpowered raid unit that you normally would not see in the field. And with the clones declining in numbers with each operation because they weren't being replaced, I don't think the average Imperial task force sent out to these Separatist holdouts are going to be made up of clones. They're instead going to be made up of TK troopers, or in the future, stormtroopers and Imperial army troopers. The clones were something different. I mean, Crosshair takes out a freaking tank by patiently waiting for it to acquire its location first, and then shoots around right of its turret. I mean, that is some next level ballsiness combined with some top tier skill. The bucketheads that will follow the clones definitely will not be able to perform at this level. The clones were just a lot better trained, much more aggressive, and a lot less fearful on the battlefield. I think the only reason the Imperial raid succeeded on Desix was because you had clone troopers being led by two very, very competent clones. I mean, when Crosshair wasn't taking out tanks in a ridiculous way, he was using tiny little mirrors to reflect laser bolts around the corner. This just wasn't normal behavior for a soldier. It should all be mentioned that these clones were all specialized to fight droids, and they had a tremendous amount of experience, well, at least most of them did. The type of experience that a normal Imperial commander and their TK troopers would definitely not have. I mean, how does one deal with a droideka at close range? You gotta roll that popper in really slow. How important is it to take out the commander or tactical droid of a unit? It is incredibly important. I don't think the TKs are getting taught about this kind of stuff because the Imperial Army by this point wasn't even a conventional army anymore. It was really just a peacekeeping force designed to keep the Imperial citizens in check. The TK troopers definitely were not trained to assault heavily fortified targets. And I think if the TK troopers had taken on this mission themselves instead of Crosshair and Commander Cody, they probably would have made it out of the shuttle after it was shut down, and they definitely would not have been able to take out that tank with a sniper rifle and make that assault over that bridge into Desix City. The TK troopers instead would require reinforcements, and they would get bogged down significantly outside of the city, and they would most likely have to carry out a traditional siege. If you take a look at the clone raid team, they weren't even at platoon strength. It was a very small squad. And so they had to depend heavily on moving quickly so that the enemy couldn't trap them and bring their numbers down on top of them. And so the clones were basically running and gunning and trying to get to the enemy leader as soon as possible. It wasn't an impossible mission. Obviously, having Crosshair on Overwatch helped tremendously, but it was a different type of fighting with a different and more aggressive mentality. Classic Clone Force 99 Commando kind of stuff. And because this unit of clones were led by Commander Cody and someone like Crosshair, basically this entire unit was now a commando unit, and this is probably why they performed so admirably in this situation. The TK troopers and their officers at this point were completely green. They're like first generation. They lacked the experience and skills to take on an operation like this, and so a lot of mistakes would be made and a lot of casualties would probably be taken. The clones in the raid team really had no choice but to go hard. Remember, this originally was supposed to be a diplomatic envoy ship. The Seppies just shot them out of the air without any warning. Desix City is fairly fortified too, if you take a look at it. The only visible entry in the city is through that narrow bridge we keep talking about, and of course that is overlooked by several layers of defense. Besides needing reinforcements, the TK troopers would need artillery support, fighter support, and they would need some armored vehicles to help them cross over that bridge in that final assault. And remember, defenders don't need as many people as attackers. Usually attackers need to outnumber defenders at least 3 to 1. And Desix would probably require even more than that given how many firing positions the droids could hide in and how vertical defenses are. And high ground in Star Wars is even more powerful than the Chosen One. And the city that the Empire is trying to take, well, it reminds me a lot of Minas Tirith on a smaller scale. Desix was also an agricultural planet. You might not be able to tell that by the dusty surface of the planet, but the city was surrounded by terraced farming plots and could potentially have food reserves for months, if not years. This was essentially a fortified city designed specifically to hold out in long sieges. So if the clones hadn't done their, daring commando raid before the defenses had solidified, I don't think the TK troopers would have had much success taking this city. But there is one weapon that Desix doesn't really have an answer for, and why most sieges in the Star Wars galaxy last days instead of months. We're of course talking about the Empire's wide range of Star Destroyers. The natural course of a siege would eventually involve one of these larger ships bearing their turbo lasers down on whatever fortified position stands in their way. At a certain point, the Imperial commander in the theater will no longer care about the resources, the manpower, and all the other, valuable things on the planet and decide to just flatten everything. The resilience of a Separatist holdout will not be tolerated, and base Delta Zero or the complete destruction of the surface of a planet will be carried out. There's only one defense against base Delta Zero if you don't have your own enemy fleet to engage the Star Destroyers in orbit, and that is a planetary shield. I mean, these things are usually tethered to some ground-based generators far larger and more powerful than anything you would find on a ship. Planetary shields are extremely potent and can even resist the might of an entire sector fleet firing at the same time, as we see during the Battle of Hoth. The Empire was forced to launch a ground invasion outside of the shield in order to take out the rebel base. As a matter of fact, the Empire would specifically develop new ships like the Onager to take on this challenge. That's actually most likely what cratered the city outside of Dooku's palace on Serena. And eventually the Death Star would be developed to take on some of the most powerful planetary shields in the galaxy, like the one that Alderaan most likely had up. The core worlds were far richer than the Outer Rim planets on which the Separatists gathered, and so core world planets like Alderaan would have had access to some incredible defenses. The reality is some Separatist holdouts might be able to delay the Empire from taking over for quite some time, but eventually the planetary shield would crack, the garrison would run out of food, something would break, and resistance would become futile. And that's because the Empire wasn't really a rational force. It wasn't pragmatic in how it approached its operations. It wasn't really realistic. It was all about making people conform, and the harder you stuck out, the more rebellious you were to the Empire, the bigger of a threat you were. Ideally, if you ran one of these Separatist holdouts, your best course of action is concealing your location as much as possible so that no one can find you, which is how the Agmar Separatist garrison held out for so long. So there you have it, guys. That is my assessment of these Separatist holdouts. It would be interesting to see more of them. I'm sure that they do exist. Maybe the sheer number of Separatist holdouts will save some of these holdouts from destruction until later on in the Galactic Empire's reign. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about this. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy,